Okay, hey there everybody, Mr. Lewis here, ready to go through these last couple sections of Unit 3 today. Here's what our schedule looks like. Today is Friday, October 30th. Tomorrow's Halloween. Have a good Halloween. But next week, Monday, Tuesday, we're going to review Unit 3. Wednesday, you'll have an at-home review for Unit 3. And then Thursday and Friday, depending on which day I have you in class, you will be able to take the test in class that day. So for you virtual learners, I'm going to post instructions about which day you'll be taking the test. So just know that Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday will be review for Unit 3, and we'll be testing at the end of next week. All right, so getting into, first of all, 3.6 and then 3.7. 3.6 is only 2 slides long. It's how firms make short-run decisions and long-run decisions. And then 3.7 is a little bit longer. That's the biggest section of this entire unit as we dive headfirst into perfect competition. So first of all, short-run decisions. Basically, a firm has one of two decisions to make. Should I stay or should I go? Meaning, should I continue to operate in this market or should I exit the market and go put my resources toward some different type of industry that I might find to be more profitable potentially? Okay, so here are the reasons I should stay. If I'm going to continue operating in the market, one of two things has to be true. Either my total revenue is covering my total variable cost, or if we divide each of those by quantity, price is greater than average variable cost. If either of these two things are true, we will continue to operate. Essentially, here's what this is saying. Even if we're losing money overall, we're going to take that fixed cost that's over here. We can't see it right now, but we know that there's a fixed cost that's separate from variable. We're going to set that aside because we're not worried about all these startup costs. What we're really worried about right now is, are we covering our operating costs? Variable costs relate to output, right? So as long as we're able to cover for each individual unit we make and sell, as long as the price is greater than what it cost us additionally to make that unit, then we'll continue to operate. Because even if I'm losing money now, what this tells me is that over the long run, I could potentially make up that difference, right? I could cut into that debt and eventually maybe earn a profit. However, the reasons I would leave the market or go, shut down, exit, is if the opposite is true. If my total revenue is less than variable cost, not just less than total cost, but variable cost, now I need to go because I'm not even covering my operating costs, right? Not only am I losing money overall, but I can't even cover my cost of operation. So my price per unit that I sell is less than what it costs me on average in terms of variable cost. That doesn't make sense. I'm going to exit the market in the short run if that's true. Now, looking at the long run, we said that even if we're losing money, as long as price is greater than AVC or total revenue is greater than VC, we'll stay in the market, right? However, looking at the long run, will the number of firms increase or decrease is the common question you see. So basically, are firms going to enter this market, or are we going to see firms leave this market down the road? As long as there are no barriers, so as long as there's nothing keeping companies from coming into the market, such as, say, a patent or maybe like a government certification or permit of some type, or the market is being completely dominated by one or two companies, as long as those types of barriers don't exist, here's what we're going to see. If firms in the market are earning profit, in the long run, new firms are going to come in, okay? So that profit is like a light, right? And the firms are like the moths, and the moth is going to go to the light. So as long as there's profit to be earned in perfect competition, new firms are going to try and enter that market. And because there's no barriers, they're going to get in. However, if firms in the market are currently incurring losses, some of them are going to have to bail. Some of those firms are going to have to leave for healthier waters, right? They just can't keep up with the cost, the low cost in the market that other producers have. and they can't sell at the low price that the market is generating. So instead, they're going to exit the market and go find a better opportunity. Now, what is going to happen in terms of our perfectly competitive market, our perfectly competitive firms, and that entire structure within the context of these short run and long run decisions? Let's take a look at this on a graph. But first, a couple specific notes about perfectly competitive markets. As we've said in the past, allocative efficiency is achieved at equilibrium in a perfectly competitive market. Okay, that is the most efficient we can get. So a few things are true. There are lots of consumers, so no one consumer has more power than another. There are lots of producers, and the same is true for them. No one producer has more power than another. And the quantity demanded is equal to the quantity supplied. So there's no shortage or surplus in the market that exists. There's no waste of any kind. Everything is efficient. This is where we like to be. Now, as we said, there's no barriers to entry, right? So what that means is if there's profit, firms are going to enter. If losses are being incurred, firms are going to leave. And we can look at price and average variable cost, or say total revenue and total cost, to make these decisions. However, we can also look at individual firms and how they make these particular decisions. So let's think about this. Individual firms, here's the role that they're taking on in a perfectly competitive market. One, they produce exactly identical products. So you might have been wondering why firms have no power in this market. This is why. They're producing exactly the same product. And I know that seems weird, and it is, but one example you can think of is like agriculture. There are some cases of agriculture where that crop is pretty much the same regardless of where you go. And as we know, there are going to be differences, right? But this is like this hypothetical perfect market. And so we're assuming they're all selling the same exact product. There's no differentiation from one product to the next. Because of that, they're also charging the same price. They have no power over the price. So instead, they just take the price. Firms in perfect competition are price takers, and they charge a constant price, and it's whatever price is determined at the market equilibrium. So when we've talked in the past about this type of market that you see here, perfect competition, this equilibrium price is what every individual firm in that market is going to charge, because they don't have any reason to charge more than that. All right, they don't have any power. They have an identical product, and that's it. They can't differentiate themselves, so they all charge a consistent price that's determined through the equilibrium. So identical products, same price, they're all price takers, and that price is constant. So let's look at this on the individual firm's graph. You've learned a few things here about the individual firm. Let's see what this looks like on a graph. So on the left, you have the market. On the right, you have the firm. From here on out, it should be known that in a perfectly competitive market, we actually have two graphs. They are side by side, exactly side by side, just like you see them here. The market we've known for a while now. We've used this, right? It's just our basic X graph, supply and demand. But what we're adding on now is this extension of the market to the individual firm that operates inside of this market, one of these firms along the supply curve, right? So here's how this works. For the individual firm, we have a few curves that we need to know. And a couple of them we've already talked about this unit. And in fact, we've already talked about all of them. But it's a question of how do we know where to put them? So our first step is understanding that because price is not changing, the demand curve for an individual firm is perfectly elastic. If price is never changing, that means that price change is 0%. So in elasticity terms, that would be some change in quantity in the numerator divided by 0. And anytime we have that, first of all, it's an undefined value. Second, it's perfectly elastic. So what we're going to do is literally take, we said the firm is a price taker, right? Right here, price taker. We're literally going to take this price that's determined at the equilibrium in the market, P sub M, and we're going to move that over to the firm. We're just moving left to right all the way over to the individual firm, and that is going to become their price. That is what the individual firm is going to charge, and because it's never changing, that is also our demand curve. It doesn't matter what quantity consumers demand, that price is staying exactly the same for right now. So where do we go from here? We have to determine, if we know the price, we need one other thing, right? The quantity. Those are what we're always trying to get, a Y value, price, and an X value, quantity. This goes back to our marginal principle. Because firms follow this marginal principle to maximize profit, and profit is maximized where MR equals MC, we need to figure out where we're going to get these two variables. So let's talk about MR. Because price is never, ever, ever, ever changing, that means that marginal revenue is constant as well. So this demand curve is also our marginal revenue. That marginal revenue is P sub M. It's constant at this price. That's what we're getting for each additional unit, right? This extra price. So that's our marginal revenue as well. It's also our average revenue, AR, because that's the constant price that we're making, so it must also be an average. If you get a 4.0 every semester, that is also going to be your average. So we have our marginal revenue. Now we just need our marginal cost. Where does that come from? Well, fortunately, we can just throw it on there. If you were drawing this by hand, you know that a marginal cost curve takes on a J shape. We learned that before in this unit. So if we were to just throw that on there, this J shape, it has to intersect with the demand curve, or in other words, the marginal revenue curve, at some point, right? They have to, and it's only one point. So we would find these two things, find where they meet, and that becomes the quantity that the firm is going to produce. Not just that, it's their profit maximizing quantity, which we're assuming the firm wants to do because they're smart, right? They're profit maximizing. So that's how we would determine quantity. That point, and there's only one where they meet, is like the equilibrium for the individual firm. Our marginal cost curve is kind of like the supply curve. If you think about it, right, it's positively sloped. And if you think about what our supply curve is over here in the market, that's also marginal private cost. So it's marginal cost. So we're just finding where MC meets demand, or marginal revenue. So how do we calculate this now? As we're thinking about the individual firm's profit, really there can be three short-run results. They can either earn profit, right, where price is greater than ATC, or they can incur losses, where price is less than ATC. They could break even, where price is equal to ATC, but typically in the short run, you don't see that. So what are the consequences? If there's profits, that's going to attract new firms, and as new firms enter the market, that's increasing supply, right? Which lowers price. Increased competition lowers the price. On the other hand, let's say firms are losing money. Well, some firms are going to leave the market, and as competition lowers, that's going to increase price. In the long run, here's what this all boils down to. No firms earn positive profit or incur economic losses. In the long run, every single individual firm that is left in the market is going to earn normal profits, meaning zero, break even. And that's a good thing. they're covering their average total cost with each unit. Their price is equal to ATC. They're covering all of their opportunity costs, their labor costs, their insurance, all of their material costs. They're paying the bosses, stockholders, all of those things. So, in the short run, if you're looking at the market on the left and the individual firm on the right, we added one curve to the individual firm's graph. The demand curve is still the same, marginal revenue, average revenue. The marginal cost curve is still the same, and this is where the two meet, so that's our quantity. What we added in here is our ATC curve, which you've learned already takes on this relationship with the marginal cost. As soon as marginal cost rises above the average starts to come up as well. What's more important than that, as you can see here, at the point that we're producing, QF, our price is up here on our demand curve, right, at P sub M. But the ATC curve is below that white dot, which is our equilibrium, which is telling us then that that is actually the price minus average cost. That is the per unit profit right there. In this case, though, with short-run losses, price has to be less than ATC, right? So instead, now our ATC curve is way up here, still takes on that same relationship with marginal cost. However, it's above our white equilibrium there, that white dot. The price is down here on our demand curve at P sub M, and the ATC is up here on this red average total cost curve. So ATC is clearly sitting above, right, has a higher Y value than price, so we're losing money. Now we can actually calculate these things, right? Profit is equal to, as it says up here in green, price minus ATC times quantity. So if we can clearly see, as we can here, that the price at our current output, Q sub F, is greater than ATC, we can actually measure that as our per unit profit. That vertical distance is our per unit dollar profit. And because we know how many units we're producing, guess what we now have? Price, P sub M, minus ATC, our red curve here, multiplied by quantity, which we already labeled as Q sub F. So this rectangular area that we've sectioned off here becomes profit. That is our per unit, that is our total economic profit, the per unit profit multiplied by the quantity. Price minus ATC times Q. On the other hand, we can also measure loss, right? If this is our price at the current quantity right here, and ATC is above that price, then we can measure the per unit loss as ATC minus price, and then multiply by quantity, and this whole area represents economic loss. In the long run, they're just going to be equal. We're going to see this ATC curve run right through that equilibrium, bottom out, and then come back up. And it's great because it makes it easy for us. Price equals ATC. That means profit is normal or zero. And efficiency is achieved because we're at the lowest point of this ATC curve and price equals marginal cost. So those things are really important to be efficient, to be socially optimal or allocative efficient. Price equals marginal cost. And we're at the minimum efficient scale here of the ATC curve, or in other words, the bottom of the ATC curve. At that point, at equilibrium in the long run for perfect competition, all of these things are true for the perfectly competitive firm. Price is equal to ATC, is equal to marginal cost, is equal to marginal revenue, and also equals, as it says up here, average revenue. All of those things are one at long run equilibrium for the individual firm. There are three different types of industries One is what we call an increasing cost industry, which just means as we expand the market and add more firms to the market, there's going to be higher resource costs. Because if you're selling, let's say, steel to a bunch of producers that are using the steel to make something, and you get more people coming to you saying, hey, we want to buy your steel, that means demand is going up for your goods, and you're going to increase the price, right? So in an increasing cost industry, expansion of the market leads to higher resource costs. In other words, the long-run supply curve is upward sloping, just like normal. But we also have two other types. There's the constant cost industry, where even with expansion of the market, meaning more firms, there's constant input prices, so marginal private cost is staying constant for each individual firm. And so the long-run supply curve is actually horizontal, meaning price is going to stay the same. In a decreasing cost industry, as more firms enter the market, input prices actually go down. Now, this is very weird and doesn't happen very often, but this is what we call a decreasing cost industry. We have a downward sloping long-run supply curve. So here's what these three would look like. Increasing cost industry. Notice these green supply curves. These are our short-run supply curves. S and dark S here, S apostrophe. We'll call it S1 and S2 for ease. But here's our long-run supply curve in orange, right? It's more elastic because it's in the long run. We're more elastic in the long run. So even as supply increases, for example, right, and you might have a decrease in price there, over the long run, we have an increasing cost industry, which is going to lead to an increase in price in the long run overall. We also have a constant cost industry. In a constant cost industry, any changes that occur between supply and demand in the short run, we're still going to balance out in the long run. The long run supply curve is perfectly elastic, so any changes in the short run are going to level out. This price, in other words, in the long run is going to remain constant because suppliers' costs aren't going up, so they don't have to charge a greater price. Finally, a decreasing cost industry, we see that the long-run supply curve is downward sloping. So actually, in the long run, prices will come down in this market. So as firms enter a market, supply increases, right? We know that. As new firms are coming in, supply increases. Well, usually, with a supply increase, there's a short-run decrease in price, right? Supply goes up, price comes down. That makes sense. However, what happens to the long-run price depends on which of these three types of industries we're dealing with. So a couple more things here, almost done. We can also see total revenue on a graph, and it's pretty easy to measure because we have price times quantity, right? That's total revenue. Well, we already have those two things. We already have price as P sub M, and we already have quantity for the individual firm as Q sub F. So price times quantity. It's just a Y value times an X value. So this whole area would be total revenue. We can also look at total cost on a graph, right? Total cost is equal to ATC times quantity. So we have an ATC curve. We also have quantity. So in the long run, right now, this ATC curve is just flowing through our equilibrium. So we're probably in the long run. ATC is the same as price. Quantity is Q sub F. So this whole area would represent total cost. Now, let's say we were in the short run. If we're earning profits, we can still do this. Total revenue is going to be price times quantity, or this area, but ATC is right here. So instead, total cost is only going to be ATC, or this value, somewhere thereabouts, times quantity, or this much. What's left over is profit. The remaining revenue on top that you see here is profit. Finally, if we're losing money in the short run, this would still be our total revenue, but cost is up here. So now this whole thing is going to be total cost. The total cost that's above total revenue in this case would be our total economic loss, the remaining cost that's on top. So what about actually using numbers here? If you were to go through this one, for example, here's where MR and MC meet. right? So we have to establish that as our quantity, 80. The price is $1 even. The average cost at a quantity of 80 is 60 cents. So we would do price minus ATC, or $1 minus 60 cents, times 80 units, or 40 cents times 80 units, or in other words, $32 in profit. That would be our economic profit on this particular graph. We can also look at this in a different way. So sometimes if a firm is losing money, they still are maximizing profit. But a different way to put that is they're minimizing loss, right? They're still doing the best they can. So like this firm, for example, here's marginal cost, here's marginal revenue. We're going to find the point where those two curves meet, and it happens here at 260 units. But even though price is 300, the ATC at that output is 495. So we're losing money here. I want you to take a second and calculate this and see if you can figure out how much money we're actually losing. If you want to pause the video, go ahead and do that. But I'm going to move on. So we would take 495 minus 300. So we're losing $195 per unit. Then we would multiply by our quantity of 260, and we're going to come up with a loss of $50,700. So hopefully you were able to get that. It's simply ATC minus price times quantity, the same profit or loss formula that we normally use. So, okay, they're losing money. How do we know if they shut down? Remember, our decision-making process. If price is greater than average variable cost, they'll continue to operate. If price is less than average variable cost, they're going to shut it down. So let's take a look. Right here, even though ATC is $4.95 and price is $300, along this axis, this horizontal value, this x value I should say, at $2.60, average variable cost on this red curve is below our price. So even though this firm is losing money, they are still going to continue to operate in the short run. If in the long run this continues, they need to shut down. Otherwise, they're in for some big trouble. So that's it for today, you guys. Take a look through these things, and if you have any questions, please let me know. There are 2 levels to go with this, so check those out on Buzz and try to have those done before next week so we can continue our review as planned and then get you ready for the test at the end of next week. All right, have a great weekend, everyone. See you next time.